Good afternoon, everybody. Firstly, my apologies for being slightly late. The telephone always goes just as you need to get out the door, but my apologies for that. We're just a minute late. So good afternoon and welcome to this local review body, the 15th of April 2024. Without any further ado, let me get to introduce people. First of all, I'm Councillor Bob Braun. I'm the convener of the local review body. To my right, I have Councillor David Illingworth, and to my left, I have Bailey Mike Williamson. We are all members of the Planning and Placemaking Committee as a requirement to sit on this committee. To my far right is Mrs. Leslie Tierney. She is an independent planning advisor. She has had no involvement with any of these cases until they were appealed to the local review body. To my left, beyond Bailey Mike Williamson, is Colin Elliott, who is our legal advisor for this afternoon, and beyond him, Mr. Danny Williams, who is the Democratic Governance Officer. So, members, do we have any declarations of interest this afternoon? Bailey Mike Williams?
None.
And Councillor Illingworth?
None.
Unusually, on this occasion, I do have a declaration of interest. That is for item 4.2 this afternoon. Not non-financial, sorry, I beg your pardon, non-financial, no, it's just a non-financial declaration of interest on that item. For the purposes of that, that paper, we have a reserve to sit in. That's Councillor Ian Massey, who will come over and sit with us in a moment. So the next item on the agenda is the minute for the last placemaking, the minute of the last LRB. As I was the only member sitting, I will approve that minute, and that's fine. Now, members, can I ask for your agreement that we can alter the agenda this morning for the purposes of having Councillor Massey sit in rather than have him left waiting? Are we happy to move item 4.2 to the first paper this afternoon?
Yes, certainly.
Councillor Illingworth?
Agreed.
Okay, fine. Thank you. So, Councillor Massey, can I ask you to come up, take my place? I will leave for the moment. You need to obviously decide amongst yourselves who will be sitting as convenient. And obviously, don't forget to call me back when you finish.
And can I nominate Councillor Bailey Williamson to take the chair for this paper?
Agreed.
Thank you, everybody. I think it takes a bit to move chairs. Thank you. We're moving on to paper 4.2, which is the erection of a dwelling house in principle, land 20 metres east of Easter Drummath 30 Cottage, Spitalfield. Could I ask Leslie Tierney to introduce the application for review?
Do the slides first. So next slide, please. So this is the location of the appeal site. It's marked with the yellow star there, as you can see, to the east of Spitalfield. No better?
Yep.
Okay. So the application site is denoted there in the aerial image with the yellow star. To the east of Spitalfield, and as you go along the road there towards McClure, further over to the east. Next slide, please. And then this is just zooming in so you can see the proximity of the site to Spitalfield, just to the west of the application site there. Next slide, please. This is the red line outline of the application site, the other properties nearby, Easter Drumnaherty to the west of the application site, and then Easter Drumnaherty further along the road, and then another cottage, Silver King Cottage, to the east. Next slide, please. And then this is an aerial image, which is taken from the applicant's information, just so you can see the relationship of the application site with the property to the immediate west, and then a little bit further along the road to to Easter Drumnaherty to the east. Next slide, please. And then this is an indicative drawing here, which shows, it's the same image, it just shows the access in off the road and where the house would be located approximately. Next slide, please. These are aerial images that were contained within the applicant's information, so it just gives you an overview of the surrounding area apart from where the two cottages are. So the site's indicated there with the yellow arrow. The one on the left is as you look north, and then the one on the right is as you look south. Next slide, please. And then this is information that was contained in the applicant's information, which is essentially where the application site is, just down the bottom right-hand corner there of the aerial image, outlined in red, and then the access, the blue denoted area that runs up to the farm up in the top left-hand corner there. Next slide, please. And then this information is the land ownership, the farm ownership plan. So you can see the various fields in their ownership denoted with the kind of yellow boundaries. The application site is where the yellow star is. And you can possibly just make out the other properties in their ownership at Gourdie Farmhouse and Gourdie Cottages and Dorham Bungalow. Next slide, please. And then these are photographs of the site. So this is as you're moving from Maclure to Spitalfield in a westerly direction. The application site is where the yellow arrow is marked, and there's a hedge between it and the cottage next door. Next slide, please. This is just moving closer into the application site. You can perhaps more clearly see the cottage to the west there. New slide, please. And then again, as you come a bit closer past where that tree is on the right-hand side, where the site opens up. Next slide, please. And then this is now looking in the opposite direction, towards the east. And that's the application site marked with the arrow, and the access point to the site off the main road there, just where that yellow line is marking the side of the road. Next slide, please. And then this is just a closer up image of the access into the site, which, as you can see, is the corner of an agricultural field, essentially. Next slide, please. And then that's just a closer image looking up towards the existing farm. Next slide, please. So just by way of introduction and background to the appeal, it relates to a dwelling house on land to the east of Easter Drumnaherty Cottage, Spitalfield. The site lies on the north side of the A984. The existing beech hedge and the oak tree on the road boundary will be retained, and new beech hedge planting is proposed on the other boundaries. The site's in an area characterised by open farmland with a dispersed pattern of individual cottages and farm buildings. The site access is from the existing field access. The house called Easter Drumnaherty Cottage lies to the west, with the C-listed Easter Drumnaherty farmhouse located further to the east. Two previous applications have been refused, with the latest being in June 2023 and subsequently refused by the local review body at a previous meeting. The reasons for refusal: firstly, the proposal does not satisfy the siting and design criteria set out in national and local planning policy for new homes in rural areas. Further, the proposal does not demonstrate that there is an essential need for a worker to live permanently or at or near their place of work. The proposal does not satisfy MPF 4 Policy 17 Rural Homes and LDP 2 Policy 19 Housing in the Countryside and Housing in the Countryside Supplementary Guidance 2020. 2. The proposed development does not respect the character and amenity of the place. The the proposal does not satisfy the requirements of MPF 4 Policy 14, Design Quality in Place, and Policy 1A and 1B, Placemaking and Associated Supplementary Guidance 2020 of the Perth and Kinross LDP 2. The application site is a greenfield site and it has not been allocated for development, and it is not explicitly supported by policies of the LDP 2. The proposal is therefore contrary to Policy 9B of MPF 4. 4. The application site is prime agricultural land, and the loss of this valued land to the development does not satisfy MPF 4 Policy 5, Soils, paragraph B2, and Policy 50, prime agricultural land of the Perth and Kinross LDP 2. Finally, the application site is in a flood risk area, and the proposed development may put people or property at risk of flooding, which is contrary to MPF 4 Policy 2022, Flood Risk and Water Management, and Policy 52, New Development and Flooding of the Perth and Kinross LDP 2. So in terms of the assessment by the Planning Service, the principal policy considerations being MPF 4 Policy 17 on rural homes and LDP 2 Policy 19 housing in the countryside and the related supplementary guidance. Policy 17 supports development for new homes in rural areas which are suitably scaled, sited and designed to be in keeping with the character of the area, and the development is demonstrated to be necessary to support the sustainable management of a viable rural business or croft, and there is an essential need for a worker to live permanently at or near their place of work. This aligns with LDP Policy 19, whereby the relevant category for assessment of the proposal is 3.3 economic activity. Also, national and local placemaking policies, MPF 14, Design Quality in Place, and LDP 2, Policy 1A and 1B, Placemaking, state development must contribute positively to the quality of the surrounding built and natural environment, and the design density and siting of development should respect the character and amenity of the place. Proposals should also incorporate new landscape and planting works appropriate to the local context and the scale and nature of the development. The site is on prime agricultural land, and MPF 4 Policy 5 and LDP 2 Policy 50 apply. Policy allows small-scale development directly linked to a rural business or farm, including housing, providing it is compatible with all other aspects of the policy framework of the plan, and there are no other suitable non-prime land sites available, and it does not adversely affect the viability of the agricultural unit. Also, Policy 9 states proposals on greenfield sites will not be supported unless the site has been allocated for development or the proposal is explicitly supported by policies in the LDP. In respect of new development and flooding, in MPF 4 Policy 22 and LDP 2 Policy 52 are relevant. National policy promotes avoidance as a first principle in areas of flood risk. LDP 2 states there will be a general presumption against proposals for built development or land raising on a functional floodplain and in areas at medium to high risk of flooding from any source or where the proposal would increase the probability of flooding elsewhere. They comment on a supporting planning statement and SAC report, which have been submitted to demonstrate the economic and operational need for the dwelling house. This is a long-established arable farm business growing cereals, oilseeds, potatoes and carrots over 560 hectares. The grassland is rented out and the business has a duty of care of the animals which are grazed on their land. The business is a partnership involving 2 generations of a family, one retired from the business and one overseeing the day-to-day running of the business alongside their son, and the dwelling house is for him so he can move out of the farmhouse and increase his involvement in the business to ensure that succession is a smooth process. They own the farmhouse and 3 properties, and those are rented out to provide an essential income source separate to the agricultural income to provide sustainability. There's no other vacant accommodation on site or any buildings which could be renovated, and there are 3 members of staff as well as the son. The location of the house has been chosen to allow for a degree of separation between the father and son for independence and privacy while still being relatively close to the main farming operation, as well as providing further supervision of the farm and the farm track. However, it is considered that the site is distant from the farmhouse and related farm buildings and cottages, and that they have not fully addressed the opportunities to renovate, convert or redevelop existing houses or consider other potential sites in and around the farmyard. There's reference to the other properties on the farm, 4 properties, the farmhouse itself, Gourdie Farmhouse, number 1 and number 2, Gourdie Cottages, and Durham Bungalow. It's pointed out that it also appears to be another house next to Gourdie Farmhouse under previously approved applications. And it's considered that the supporting information does not fully address the opportunities to renovate, convert, or redevelop existing houses. Security has been put forward as justification in that the proposed site will be in view of the vehicular access road to Gourdie Farm, and also the nearby core path will be overlooked when people entering the farm unannounced from wandering off the route of the core path, and the dwelling house is required to overlook the vehicle access for the purposes of security. The site lacks full enclosure with no long established boundaries on all sides or natural features to provide a backdrop. The plot is almost double the size of the neighbouring cottage and does not respect the immediate neighbour or the character of the area. SEPA have objected due to flood risk and require a flood risk assessment. That's required to evaluate future flood risk, the close proximity of the River Tay catchment, and historic flooding in the area. So in terms of the additional information provided by the applicant, there's since the last refusal, the proposal has been amended with additional justification. As noted by planning, Robert Reid and Son is an established business which farms and owns land at Gourdie Farm and Cooper Grange Farm. It is a business partnership between Graham Reid, his wife and parents. The proposed house is for his son Taylor, so he can move out of the family home while maintaining and increasing his involvement at Gourdie Farm, as Mr. Reid is often away from the farm. It is an arable farm growing cereals, oilseeds, potatoes and carrots, over 560 hectares, and they employ 3 members of staff. The presence of a house for Taylor on site will allow all aspects of running of the farm business while his father is away, including deliveries, loading produce onto lorries in all hours, supporting the 24-hour drying of grain, managing crop rotations, and for security. There are currently no other opportunities to provide accommodation on the farm, and the other houses they own are rented out to provide other income separate and additional to the business. The house location is in view of the access road to Gourdie Farm, allowing visibility for visitors and easy access to the farm. They have reduced the size of the application site, and it's put forward that the economic and operational farming need for the house outweighs any conflict with the ground being prime ground. And in terms of a flood assessment, this has not been provided, but this can be provided if the principle of development was accepted. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I ask members if they have any questions? Councillor Massey.
One question really, it's contained, the SAC report clearly demonstrates there's a need for accommodation for the workers, Can SEPA put in a holding objection? Can somebody explain to me what that holding objection is and why it's in place?
Yeah, I'll come in there. Colin, you can add if you wish. Yeah, I mean, obviously, SEPA have objected to the application due to the avoidance of flood risk as set out in NPF 4 Policy 22, and that states a precautionary approach to flood risk should be taken by avoiding development within flood risk areas or areas at risk of flooding, including land or built form with an annual probability of being flooded or greater than 0.5%, which must include an appropriate allowance for climate change. They've added the site is fully shown to be at risk of flooding based on the SEPA future flood maps, and that indicates there's a risk of flooding from fluvial sources, including the River Tay, Millhole Burn and Peat Hill Burn. And they've included information about several significant flood events in this area, recorded as far back as 1928 as well.
Convener, answer that question in a different way. You've referred to the SAC report and the essential need. That is about the business need. That's a separate issue from the flood risk, because the flood risk relates to the low. What they're saying is the SAC report says there's a need for that farm, but then you have to look at the individual location that's proposed. And as I understand it, as Mr. Tierney just said, it's in a flood risk area. SEPA have put in a holding an objection. And your difficulty is, I'll go further forward in terms of procedure, is you couldn't simply grant this application in the face of a statutory consultee objecting. As I know you're familiar with from the Planning and Placemaking Committee, it would have to go, if you were minded to grant it, would have to go to the Scottish Ministers to decide whether or not they're going to call it in. In doing so, you would provide a detailed justification why you're going against the SEPA objection. And you've got to consider whether you've got the information to do that at this stage.
So, and what's basically being said here is that it's a location that the SEPA are objecting to.
What SEPA are saying is that particular location that you've seen the maps for, and there's one up at the moment, the proposed site is on a flood risk area.
Councillor Illingworth,
No questions.
could I ask a question about the SEPA future report? That is for its projected flood risk for to 2028, if that's correct. And that is where the issue is around, or the basis of SEPA's objection.
I think we'd just say yes. I think I did have a look at the flood maps, and I'm careful not to introduce too much more information, but the existing flood map indicates a 0.1% risk per year, whereas the future flood risk, which is what SEPA are referring to in their objection, that is an increased risk up to 0.5%. So, and that's per year we're talking about, not a 1 in 200 years. Slightly different way of thinking about it, you'll be familiar with from flood risk. That is notated as an increased risk of 0.5% chance per year.
Thank you. Could I so do apologise? I ask members if they feel that they can proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before them, that the information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning officer, or do we require further information?
Happy to proceed.
Councillor Massey?
Happy to proceed.
We're happy to proceed, therefore. Could I therefore ask Councillor Illingworth for his view?
Yeah, this is an application I would love to approve, but the SEPA, the assessment from SEPA that's in a flood risk, and I'm afraid I can't approve this one.
Thank you. Councillor Massey?
Thank you. As I said, the SAC report clearly demonstrates an economic and operational need for a house, but having looked at the SEPA flood risk assessment, and I've come to the same conclusion as Councillor Illingworth and refuse permission. Thank you.
Thank you. And I believe, just give me a second, that I also agree with the appointed officer's view about the location. SEPA's holding objection, and I would ask that the applicant considers alternative sites within the farm.
Convener, what I have is a unanimous refusal. I'll take you to page 339, 340 of your papers, which is the original ground of refusal. I just want to be clear with all three members. Convener, you mentioned really refusing on the allocation, the other grounds. Just want to check with the other members. Are you refusing on the 5 grounds of refusal, particularly obviously ground 5, which is a flooding issue, but are you in agreement with the other grounds of refusal, just accepting as what the appointed officer has done?
I'm in agreement.
As I am.
Thank you. I think, unfortunately, we've had to decline this application at the moment. Thank you.
Convener, if you want to pause, Councillor Massey will leave and we'll get Councillor Braun back in.
Okay, thank you very much. And we can minute our thanks to Councillor Massey for sitting in for me. It is a rarity. I think only the second time in 7 years that I've had to step out, but there we are. It does happen. So members, we'll now revert back to the agenda as was. So this is item originally 4.1. It's the erection of a dwelling house and agricultural shed, land 150 metres northeast of Meadowside, Middleton, Milnathorpe. Mrs. Tierney, if you could introduce for us.
Thank you, convener. Go through the slides first. Next slide, please. So this is the location of the application site. As you can see, Milnathorpe there, and the M90 motorway, with Middleton to the north side there, and the application site marked with the yellow star. Next slide, please. And then this is as you zoom in, Middleton, just a small collection of a handful of properties there. The application site is just where you see the yellow star there, a little bit removed from the other properties, a couple of houses on the other side of the road, but as you can see, a field on the top side of that road there. Next slide, please. And then this is one of the plans that was submitted with the application. The red line denotes the outline of the application site. The blue land there is land in the ownership of the applicant, although they do own significant land holding to the south side of the dual carriageway beside Milnathorpe. Next slide, please. And then this is as you come into the application site. Again, the site outlined in red there, just with some contours. If we go to the next slide, please. There you can see the proposal plan, which shows closest to the road, the agricultural shed that's proposed as part of the application, and then the access road into the site with the proposed dwelling house on the north side of the application site. Next slide, please. These are some images from the application, which is you can see the shed and the dwelling house sitting side by side on the top left-hand image there, and then also the two-storey dwelling house, and then also the elevations of the proposed agricultural shed. Next slide, please. And then these are the actual drawings of the dwelling house. So as you can see, substantial property, 2 stories in the main with a small side extension as well. Again, that's 2 stories. The main part of the house has accommodation within the roof as well. And as you can see, the roof lights within the roof space. Next slide, please. So then these are photographs from the site itself. So this is viewing the site from the south. As you look up towards the application site, Middleton is basically behind where the yellow arrow is, but the application site is denoted by where the yellow arrow is. Next slide, please. And then this is as you come closer into the application site. The house and the shed would be located where you see the yellow arrow, and the access would come in just where you see the gap there, just to the right-hand side of the picture. Next slide, please. And then this is as you move a little bit further up the road past the entrance into the site, but you can see where the property would be and the shed would be located within that field area where the yellow arrow is. Next slide, please. And then this is the northern western boundary of the site, where you see the post and wire fence there to the left-hand side. This is really the top side of the application site, but as you can see, even along the roadside, not a huge amount of existing landscape or boundary features. Next slide, please. And then this is now from The northern side looking south towards Milnathort, the access into the site shown where you see the yellow line. Again, you can see the field is very open with just some small hedging along the roadside there. Next slide, please. And then again, just as you come closer into the site, heading south, the open field with the application site denoted by the arrow. Next slide, please. And then again, just as you're looking further south, some of the hedging that exists along the roadside. Next slide, please. And then this is just a slightly further away view, so you can see the hedging along the roadside. There is a post and wire fence across the middle of the image there, but otherwise quite open and uncontained. Next slide. Okay. So yes, introduction and a bit of background. It's, as you know, an application for a dwelling house and an agricultural building next to a small grouping of buildings known as Middleton, just outside Milnathort, off the U228 public road. An almost identical proposal was refused permission last year on the grounds that the site was isolated and that inadequate information on drainage had been submitted. The need case for the house at that point was accepted. The reasons for refusal with this application, firstly, that the site is not an identifiable site with long established boundaries which separates the site naturally from the surrounding land. It proposes the subdivision of a wider field with new landscaping and boundary treatments. The proposed dwelling is therefore contrary to the specific requirements of Section 3 of the Council's Housing in the Countryside Guide 2020 and Policy 19, Housing in the Countryside, of the adopted Perth and Kinross Council's Local Development Plan 2019. These policies require acceptable proposals linked to economic need to take place within identifiable sites that have existing and long-established boundaries. Secondly, as the site does not have an established landscape framework which can absorb the development proposed, it will result in an incongruous development on a site with no natural boundaries. Accordingly, the proposal, both the shed and the dwelling, is contrary to Policy 1A of the adopted Perth and Kinross Council's Local Development Plan 2, which seeks to ensure that all developments contribute positively to the quality of the surrounding built and natural environment. Thirdly, it has not been demonstrated that there is a justified labour need for further residential accommodation on the farm on the basis of an essential need linked to the continued operation of the farm for animal welfare reasons. The proposal is therefore contrary to Section 3 of the Council's Housing in the Countryside Guide 2020 and Policy 19, Housing in the Countryside, of the LDP2, which both require there to be evidenced animal welfare reasons for the new dwelling. So in terms of the assessment by the planning service, a labour requirement report was submitted similar to the one submitted for the previously refused application. The on-balance view of that proposal was that less than half a worker requirement for a livestock labour requirement was acceptable. However, the planning service has reviewed the specific wording of the HITC guidance, which states that it must be demonstrated that any house is essential to the continued operation of the farm for animal welfare reasons. They consider that they overly favourably interpreted the guidance as far as the non-livestock elements are concerned. It is noted that MPF4 is somewhat silent on the type of farm work justifying a dwelling in the context of operational or essential need, and that there is no specific restriction requiring livestock to be the sole requirement for an essential worker dwelling. There does therefore remain conflict with the LDP and the Housing in the Countryside guidance. However, the conclusion is that 0.49 of need accredited to livestock is not sufficient justification for a new house. The location of the house remains unacceptable as it is a very open site with only one boundary with any natural features. No other potential sites have been assessed and discounted, and there is no additional information on land and buildings in the applicant's ownership which may be available for development. Extra biosecurity information is not sufficient to justify a house. However, the shed in itself would not be unacceptable, and they've noted that SEPA require more drainage information related to phosphorus reduction. So the case that the applicant has made provides further background to the farm. Morecast Farm is 573 acres, and the family have farmed here through 3 generations. Most of the land is in a ring fence to the south of the M90 motorway. A single land block is held at Middleton and runs to 57 acres. The farm is a mixed livestock and arable holding. Cattle were reared and a sheep flock were maintained. However, a disease outbreak in 2018 resulted in a temporary suspension of beef cattle operations. It is now proposed to resume activities, and the new agricultural building will serve as a livestock isolation unit, and the siting is on the Middleton land block away from the main farm activities. The farm has been here by the Young family for 100 years. The father and mother, Mr. and Mrs. Young, are in their 70s, but Mr. Young does not really work on the farm now. They reside at Morecast Farmhouse. The operations requirement is met by 2 sons, Hamish, who lives at Morecast Cottage, and Alistair, who's the applicant who currently resides off the farm. In terms of need, the whole farm agricultural activities generate a labour requirement of 3.64 labour units. This provides a justification for a new dwelling, as there are only 2 houses on the farm. In line with animal health and welfare guidance, best practice states that ahead of cattle reintroduction, a separate building as an isolation and quarantine facility is essential to improve biosecurity on the holding. The new dwelling will be occupied by the stockman, Mr. Alistair Young, the applicant, who is also a partner in the farm business. 2 on-farm dwellings are not sufficiently close enough to the site of the isolation shed to provide effective supervision for animal welfare and security reasons, or to respond in the event of a livestock emergency. So more than simply the element of farm operations relating to animal welfare activities should be considered. MPF 4 Policy 17A does not require essential housing for farm workers to be located on sites that are naturally enclosed to all boundaries, but instead to be suitably sited to be in keeping with the character of the area. The whole of the holding was reviewed to identify sites which could meet the natural containment siting expectations of the planning guidance, and a SWOT analysis was applied in accordance with the placemaking guide. The other sites that they surveyed and reasons for discounting them are that they are within the protected landscape, they're crossed by core paths, they are subject to high risk of surface water flooding, they're adjacent to the M90 motorway but require significant tree removal to accommodate buildings and the access track. Compensatory planting would be extensive on this site and would utilise productive arable ground. They've discounted other sites because although they are productive arable ground, the amount of compensatory planting that would need to go onto them would be extensive. With regard to the selected site, every effort was made to meet the siting criteria. So in terms of this site, it's a triangular shaped plot with planting to 2 sides. It would use the less productive part of the field. It is not isolated, but is visually seen with housing and other man-made structures at Middleton, and it has a backdrop of mature trees. The proposal does not subdivide the 57-acre field, but utilises one corner where existing trees and hedging and a strong natural backdrop can help to integrate the development. The guide does not require in all cases new economic need housing to be on sites which have established landscaping to all boundaries, but does expect mitigation measures to be incorporated to minimise adverse impacts and needs to demonstrate that the site chosen is the best possible option in terms of fit with the landscape and reflects the traditional pattern and character of the area, that every effort has been made to meet the siting criteria, and that where an alternative site is chosen, it is clearly set out and justified. In this case, the buildings would be read visually together with the established trees and hedging, and from a number of surrounding points would be seen against a backdrop of man-made structures at Middleton, including the reservoir houses and farm sheds, and more distant hills beyond. This corner of an unproductive ground was also large enough to provide the new structural planting, which could strengthen the site's landscape framework. The applicant also considered that recent planning approvals for new farm workers' dwellings are comparable, with reference to one at land north of Chance Inn Farm at Kinross, and another one on land northwest of Potention Farm at Crieff. Neither of those sites were fully enclosed with natural planting to all boundaries. Both have open fields to north and east, Both developments will rely on new planting delivered by planning condition to provide full containment, and the labour justification for the dwelling on land north of Chance Inn related solely to an arable farm operation. The only other matter to mention is one general comment was received from the local civic trust group, and the comment raised is that the design and scale of the buildings are not in keeping with the area, and that the development would be the only development on the northern side of the road. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Tierney. We'll open up to questions. I just have one, after you've partially answered that, I think, but the land we see on the map above us, obviously much of the building is on the other side of the road. So is there no land that they could use? I mean, it seems to me that there's plots there that could have been possibly looked at. Is that suitable land, or you don't think so?
Well, so as part of the appeal papers, they did provide the information on the other land in their ownership, which the majority of is on the other side of the dual carriageway, and they've given reasons why they've discounted the options on the other side of the road and why this is the option that they've chosen.
But the land we see above us, it's in Middleton, that's all their land as well, is it?
Audrey, could you maybe go back to the site plan with the blue land, the red line and the blue land, please? So on this side of the road, that's their ownership, the land outlined in blue, and the site's the red one.
So all the other properties are out with their control. Yeah. Okay, fine. Thanks. Okay, well, open up the questions. Councillor Illingworth, any questions?
I have no questions.
And Bailey Williamson?
No, I have no questions.
So members then, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? And that the information contained in the papers, the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Illingworth?
Happy to proceed.
And Bailey Williamson?
I'm happy to proceed.
And I'm too happy to proceed as well. So I'll start us off on this one. I think we've obviously had a good look at the paperwork and the photographs before us. This is a substantial property, of no doubt, 6-bedroom. It's going to be on a site which is quite prominent, I think, and has no natural boundaries to it, which we require as part of our policy on housing the countryside. There's also little mitigation for an economic need. On this case, it only works out at half a labourer, so that isn't there. It's a substantial property on an unbounded site, easily visible. So I think on this occasion, I'm going to refuse the appeal. Obviously the reasons for refusal, which are listed here, are standard and acceptable, but I do feel there's no mention of NPF4, which also it contravenes to some extent. So we may need to adjust the reasons for refusal as well. But Councillor Illingworth, if you'd like to have your say.
Yep. Sadly, I'm going to refuse this appeal for the same reasons as the convener. I know there is a huge shortage of housing in all over Perth and Kinross, and this would be some help to that. But I'm happy to agree with the convener's view.
And Bailey Williamson.
Yeah, I agree essentially with what you said, convener, and I agree with the officer's viewpoints that are outlined in the papers.
So, Mr. Elliott, we have a unanimous decision there. As I said, perhaps we should put something in about NPF4. Put something in that way.
Yes, convener, draw your attention to page 82 and 83 of your papers, which is the reasons for refusal. If I understand it, you're agreeing with reasons for refusal 1, 2 and 3, which is what the appointed officer refused on. But convener, you mentioned refusing on NPF4 as well. Do you have a...
Yes, I'm talking about NPF4 17. It's actually 17A. My thoughts would be the proposal is contrary to NPF4 bracket 17A, rural houses on rural housing, as the site is not in keeping with the character of the area it would subdivide a wider field and does not have a suitable landscape framework for what would be a substantial dwelling house with an agricultural shed beside it. So, I mean, you might want to polish it up with your legal knowledge, but that was basically what I'm looking at.
I think more or less that, Convener. I think you're quite clear that you're refusing on MPF4 policy 17A rural homes because it's not keeping the character area, subdividing a wider field, and doesn't have a suitable landscape framework for that substantial house with the attached agricultural shed. Okay.
Thank you, members. Now we'll move on to item 4.3. Obviously, 4.2 has been heard. 4.3 is a change of use of a flat to form short-term let accommodation unit in retrospect at 62 Monnet Road, Perth. Mrs. Tierney, if you could introduce for us.
Thank you, convener. We'll go through the slides first. So the application site is marked with the yellow star here. This is the Monart Road area, where you can see an awful lot of the white areas are the roofs of flatted properties in this general area. You will get the context of the location with essentially the town centre further to the east, but also the retail park to the west there. But predominantly in the centre of that image where the star is about 200 flats in that one location. Next slide, please. These are the plans that were submitted with the application. So it's a red line essentially around the application site, and that includes the parking space that goes along with the property. Next slide, please. And then this is the floor plan of the existing property, ground floor flat with 2 bedrooms and a communal access to the flat and the other flats in the block. Next slide, please. And then this is just to give you an impression of the older residential area to the right-hand side of the image there, the parking in the middle and the access road, Monart Road itself, and then the flatted development on the left-hand side. New slide, please. And then this is as you come round to the front of the appeal property, which as you can see is a block of flats, and the two bedroom windows of the flat are what you can see underneath where the arrow between the yellow line and the parking spaces in between the 2 cars with no car in it. Next slide, please. And then this is a closer image of the building and the 2 bedroom windows with the parking outside. Next slide, please. And then again, the 2 bedroom windows with the parking space in the middle. Next slide, please. And then this is the communal entry area, as you can see with the buzzer area there, and one key safe on the wall, which is for this property. Next slide, please. And then this is as you come into the inside area, the communal hallway. This is the entrance door to the flat, and the door that you can see on the right hand side would take you through and up to the other properties in the block. Next slide, please. And then that's just basically the other flat on the ground floor opposite the entrance door to this property. Next slide, please. And this is as you come round to the other side of the property. I don't know if you can quite see it, but between the 2 trees on the right hand side, that's where the windows are, the kitchen area and the living area of the property on the ground floor, and the communal bin area and amenity area to the outside. Next slide, please. And then just another view again, just if you can see the yellow line just above the bin, the communal bin area there, that's the windows of the property and the communal amenity area outside. Next slide, please. And just another closer image just to zoom in on that a bit. Next slide, please. So just to give you the background to this appeal, 62 Monart Road, a 2 bedroom ground floor flat within a modern flatted development. Monart Road is identified as being an area of residential and compatible uses which is out with the commercial centre and the secondary use areas. There are around 200 flats across the whole area of Monart Road, which is acknowledged will be a mix of privately owned and rented flats occupied by a variety of people, including students. The entrance to the building is via a communal door leading to flats on the remaining floors. The flat is on the immediate left of the ground floor, opposite the door to one other ground floor flat in this block. The Council's non-statutory planning guidance on short-term lets was approved on the 1st of November 2023 and is a material consideration, and this application was determined on the 29th of November after the guidance was adopted. The guidance acknowledges that while short-term lets can bring economic benefits to the host and local areas, this must be balanced against the impact the loss of that residential property has on the availability of affordable housing for local people and impact on residential amenity, especially where the property is within a predominantly residential area, and there could be an adverse impact on amenity for existing residents, particularly in blocks with shared and communal entry. It also states proposals must comply with all relevant LDP2 policies, in particular Policy 1 placemaking, which states that development must contribute positively to the quality of the surrounding built and natural environment. So the reasons for refusal in this case, firstly, by virtue of the potential for an increase in noise nuisance, both when using the property and leaving the property, the proposal would impact adversely on the character and amenity of the local area, which is predominantly residential in character, particularly the residential amenity of those living permanently in the block and close by. Accordingly, the proposal is contrary to Policy 30E Tourism of the National Planning Framework 4, which states that new proposals for short-term letting will not be supported where the proposal will result in an unacceptable impact on local amenity and character of the area. Secondly, by virtue of the shared entry arrangements, the flatted nature of the property and the predominantly residential character of the existing area, the proposal would result in an increased potential for noise nuisance and general disturbance to occur and affect other existing residents in the block and those living close by. It would also introduce a land use which is not compatible with the surrounding predominantly residential properties. The proposal is therefore contrary to Policy 17, residential areas of the Perth and Kinross Local Development Plan 2 and the Council's non-statutory planning guidance on short-term lets, which both seek to protect existing residential amenity, and Policy 1A of the adopted LDP 2, which seeks to ensure that all new proposals contribute positively to the surrounding environment. Thirdly, by virtue of the potential for an increase in noise nuisance, both when using the property and leaving the property, the proposal is contrary to Policy 56 of the Perth and Kinross LDP 2, which looks to protect sensitive receptors from noise-generating sources. And finally, it has not been demonstrated that there is a sufficient level of either designated or available parking to service the use of the property as a short-term let. The proposal is therefore contrary to the principles of the National Roads Development Guide 2015, which requires all new developments to have suitable parking provision. So the assessment by the planning service in this case notes that this is a predominantly residential area with about 200 flats in the development. While there may be some lawful short-term let properties in this area, others are not lawful and planning permission has been applied for, and in some cases appeals are pending. The access is via a shared communal entry system, although it is noted on the ground floor there is only one other flat directly affected, which it is noted differs slightly from some of the other pending cases. However, the LDP identifies this as a residential area and there is therefore a strong need to protect existing residents' amenity. It is recognised that an STL may not generate additional footfall movements above that of a typical flat, and although residential, it is close to the town centre. However, it lies out with it and it is residential in nature, and therefore there is an impact upon residential amenity. It is noted that the letters of objection should suggest noise is an issue, and the precautionary approach is to refuse in areas and properties like this. So in terms of the case the applicant has made for the appeal, they've provided the following information and support along with a copy of their licence. 62 Monart Road has been a short-term holiday let since May 2016 and has attracted various guests from all over the world. At no time in the past 7 years have any of the neighbours complained about noise, parking or refuse. The property and surrounding area is personally checked every week. The terms and conditions clearly state guests must respect the neighbours, and an extract is provided from their terms and conditions. Signage, which includes contact details, is clearly displayed in the window, and parking space at number 62, so that if any of the neighbours have a complaint, they can be contacted personally. Recycling bins are clearly marked as commercial waste, and guests are given clear instructions on disposing of waste. The objectors live in a different block to number 62, and their property faces onto the Lade, so they shouldn't be affected by noise from the guests if there's ever a problem. They're disappointed that the objectors didn't feel they could contact them personally, discuss any of these issues, and guests are always notified that there is strictly only one parking space at the property. Many of the properties in this development are let out on a long-term basis by workmen, and there have always been problems with parking by owners and tenants, not specifically guests, just at this property. Other matters to draw to your attention, there is no objections from environmental health, and obviously the property is subject to licensing conditions. Communities Housing Strategy has indicated that the level of STL with the local postcode area is not at a level where an STL control area would be considered, and there are 18 letters of objection and no letters of support. The main issues raised by the objectors relate to impact on residential amenity and parking concerns. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We'll move on to questions. Councillor Illingworth, any questions?
Yeah, Mrs. Tierney, you mentioned that there are students living in the area. Do we know how many students?
No, I think that's just a comment that the planning service have included in their report of handling on the application, because it's general knowledge that it's a mixed area in terms of who occupies the properties. They're private, they're long-term rental, and there's some student properties as well.
Do you think students could create noise and be a nuisance?
I'm not going to talk from personal experience. I can't really answer that question, councillor, I'm afraid. Anybody can create noise anywhere.
From personal experience, I may have created some nuisance when I was a student.
Bailey Williamson, any questions?
Yes, I've got a couple of questions. My first question is about the one of the pictures. It showed a plan of the flats with some stairs. I was just trying to get an idea of the locality. Is it possible to go back to that picture, please? So I take it, Mr. Tierney, that the stairs go up the side of the building, and the shared access, or the other entrances, is basically across the corridor from that to the left as we look on that picture. Is that correct?
So the access door to the block is the top left-hand corner. So that's the front of the property as we viewed it, with the 2-bedroom windows at the front and the parking area. And that comes into that lobby where you've got the access door to the property on the left, and then the other access door to the other ground floor flat on the opposite side of that communal area. And then you go through the other door there and you go up the stairs to the other properties.
Thank you. My second question is possibly to Colin Eddy. I notice in the notice of review that there's mention that I've received a license. Could Mr. Elliott possibly just remind me on the context of that, please?
Yes, thank you. My understanding, they're referring to having received a short-term licence, and as members will be aware, that regime is done through the civic licensing team of the council. It is a separate statutory regime. You're looking at the planning use here to change to short-term use, so it's not directly relevant to the consideration of this. It's got different considerations as to why it may or may not be granted.
My third question is around it. Ms. Tierney, you mentioned repeatedly that this site was designated for residential use. Is that correct?
Yes, the town centre obviously has a very defined boundary round about it, and then as you come out, it's into a residential area. Yes.
Thank you. I have no questions myself. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is the information contained in the papers, the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Leaworth
Happy to proceed.
and Bailey Williamson.
Happy to proceed.
I too am happy to proceed. So Councillor Illingworth, on this occasion, could you start us off?
Thank you, convener. Yeah, I'd like to approve this permission. I think, given that it's an area where you have quite a number of students who do apparently create noise, given that it's at the bottom of the stairway, so it's unlikely to affect the other occupants of the stairway, and although it's defined as being a residential area, it's only like feet away from a retail park. So my view is that it should be approved.
Thank you, Councillor Illingworth. I'll come on next if I may. Short term, that's always a complicated one for us. And it all hinges really on the residential amenity. That's the core of everything. In this instance, I note there is a licence already issued, as the applicant has highlighted, but as Mr. Elliott said, that's a separate issue and doesn't really form a material consideration for us here. It is a flat with a communal entrance. Residential amenity is a concern. It is a residential area, prime residential area, and setting this in motion would make it a commercial incident within a residential area, a commercial property within a residential area. There are issues mentioned here about parking. And I do note the comments from the applicant, who mentions, of course, the fact that many objectors are not in the block, which obviously is a matter to note. However, I'm also aware of a appeal that went to the DPAA, and they have made it clear that impacts on amenity and character are not limited to recorded instances of antisocial behaviour. They've also made a highlight, which is mentioned in the reasons for refusal, that the intensification of movement of people, luggage, cars, guests, can be detrimental to the residents' amenity of the area. I note Councillor Illingworth's comments that the commercial areas, shops, whatever, are close by, but it is predominantly a residential zone area. And given the reasons for refusal and the comments made in the appeal, I'm of a mind to refuse the appeal based on the reasons for refusal which the officers put in place. So my decision is to refuse. So Councillor Bailey Williamson, this is a decision on your head now.
So, yeah, thank you. I would like to agree with the appointed officers and move that we refuse the application. I have concerns about LDP2 with the residential zone and the dilution of that residential zone. I have concerns about parking, national NPF 4 policy 30 about the commercialisation of the zone. So as I say, I'm going to refuse this application.
Thank you. Mr. Elliott, we have a majority decision on this one, 2-1, to refuse based on the reasons for refusal as listed.
Thank you, Convener. Looking at page 409, 410, as I understand it, Convener Bailey Williamson, you refused in line with the appointed officer's grounds of refusal with no changes, and the, if you like, the dissenting minority, Councillor Illingworth, we wish to approve, and basically in terms of the limited effect on the amenity and given the close proximity of other uses, other non-residential uses. So that's refused 2-1.
Thank you very much. So members, will move on now to number 4.4. This is the erection of a dwelling house, land 20 metres southwest of Braeside House, Hatchbank Road, in Gairney Bank, Kinross. Mrs. Tierney, over to you again.
Thank you, convener. Again, we'll just run through the slides first, so you know where the application site is. So the application site marked there with the yellow star, so you can get an impression Hatchbank Road at Gearney Bank to the south of Kinross there that you can see in the top of the aerial image there. Next slide, please. And then as we zoom in on the location of the application site with the M90 just to the west there, running top to bottom, and Gearney Bank, and then Hatchbank Road, the properties there just beside where the yellow star is, where the application site is. Next slide, please. And then this is as you come more closely into the application site, which, as the yellow star annotates, is within the grounds of the existing property, the existing dwelling house, Braeside House, just on the north side of Hatchbank Road there, just before you head west over the bridge over the M90. Next slide, please. And this is Braeside House itself as you look at the front of the property with the existing access into the dwelling house, and then the bridge, as I say, to the west there, which runs over the M90 to the west. A number of trees along the roadside there. Those are out with the application site boundary and then the boundary of the property. But you can see the taller Leylandi trees just in the middle of the image there. Next slide, please. And this is as you come into the driveway of the property. The building that's proposed, the house that's proposed, is within the garden area to just in front of where you see those Leylandi trees, and then the existing dwelling house to the right hand side. Next slide, please. And then this is as you come closer into where the house would actually be located at the front of the dwelling house there, small existing outbuilding, and then the boundary with the existing tall Leylandi hedging. Next slide, please. This is as you move in through the application site to where the existing house is. You're now looking to the south, to the existing boundary with Hatchbank Road, with the Leylandis on the right hand side there. Next slide, please. And then again, this is just as you're turning round to look back at the entrance into the site, you're looking south here to those trees which are out with the application site beside the road. Next slide, please. And then back round to the entrance into the property and the application site. You're starting to now look back towards the east. Next slide, please. This is taken from much further back in the property, which is the garden area of the existing Braeside House. So you're looking south here again. Next slide, please. And then this is taken looking east from the bridge over the M90. So you can't see the dwelling house, but where the arrow is there, that's the existing house in behind there and where the application site is located and the property would be. Next slide, please. And again, in beside the existing property, not really visible, but in behind those trees along the roadside, and also you can probably see the thicker clump of the Leylandi there, just to the left of the arrow. Next slide, please. And this is as the application has been submitted. The red line shows the boundary of the application site. The blue land is obviously the rest of the property in the applicant's ownership, which is the existing Braeside House. Next slide, please. And then this is a more detailed drawing of the location of the house to the front of the property there within the red line. And there's information on that drawing to do with trees and so on, which I'll come on to. Next slide, please. This is the floor plan of the one bedroom property that's proposed, and the elevations of the property, which is, as I understand it, have been altered from the previous application. A very simple style there you can see with a hip roof design. Next slide, please. And this is an aerial image. This is information from the tree survey that's been submitted with the application and the appeal. And the bottom left-hand corner there is really the most relevant in terms of trees, which are the not individual trees as such, but tree groups. The first one being the trees to the immediate west of the application site, and then the ones just to the south of the application site. So both those, I'm going to describe them as blobs. The blue blobs are the tree groups. Next slide, please. This is information from the tree survey that was submitted with the application. I understand the LRB has considered this information before as well, but it's the tree groupings to the west of the proposed house and then to the south of the proposed house as well. Next slide, please. This is a couple of images that were included within the applicant's papers, as well as the actual plans. The one in the top left-hand corner is basically a block plan which shows the existing properties along Hatchbank Road. And then the bottom one there is the same properties, but as you can see where the arrow indicates, includes the footprint of the proposed dwelling house as well. So you can see how it relates to the general form and layout of the properties on the road there. Next slide, please. And then this is just some context. The properties on the top left-hand corner there are some of the existing cottages on Hatchbank Road. You can kind of see the single-storey scale and the hip roof designs. The other houses on the bottom right-hand there are referred to by the appellant. They're the new large properties in Gairney Bank. Those garages are actually to the rear of those houses. They're not to the front of them, just for your information. Next slide, please. So yes, introduction and background. The appeal is for a small one-bedroom dwelling house in the front garden of the existing two-storey house, which is a large detached property on the north side of Hatchbank Road and is the last house before you proceed west over the bridge over the M90. The area is a mixture of house styles with farmland surrounding. The proposal effectively splits the view of the property in two, as it is proposed as a separate dwelling house rather than as an annex. A tree survey notes a number of trees within the site and the boundary of the existing house. The main affected trees are a group of cypress shelter belt trees on the western boundary. There's a second group of trees out with the application site to the south. The development would directly require the felling of the 5 trees on the western boundary and may require the maintenance of the canopy of the tree group out with the boundary to the south. Some planning history at the site, including permission for an annex under application reference 17/01281/FLL and for a dwelling house under 19/01136, which were approved under the previous LDP and have now expired. There was also a recent application 23/00593 for a dwelling house, which was refused under delegated powers. Appealed to the LRB, who dismissed the appeal at its meeting on the 23rd of October last year, agreeing that the second reason for refusal related to trees could be removed. So the 2 reasons for refusal in this case, firstly, the proposed development is poorly designed, fails to respect the building pattern and character of the area, and will have a significant detrimental impact on residential amenity. The proposal does not satisfy the requirements of MPF 4 Policy 14 Design Quality in Place and MPF 4 Policy 17 Rural Homes and LDP 2 Policy 1 Placemaking and Related Placemaking Supplementary Guidance and LDP 2 Policy 19 Housing in the Countryside and the Related Housing in the Countryside Supplementary Guidance of the Perth and Kinross LDP 2. And secondly, the proposed development does not respect the setting of the site and its characteristics. The removal of a mature tree group and an attractive green buffer to enable the development will lead to the fragmentation of an existing green network. The proposal does not satisfy MPF 4 Policy 6 Forestry, Woodland and Trees and MPF 4 Policy 20 Blue and Green Infrastructure and LDP 2 Policy 1 Placemaking, Policy 40B Trees, Woodland and Development and Policy 42 Green Infrastructure. In terms of the assessment by the planning service, it's noted that the site lies in the countryside where new houses need to be suitably scaled, sited and designed to be in keeping with the character of the area under policy 17A. And the proposal is contrary to this due to the negative effect on the existing house, which it will sit in front of and in close proximity to, and which impacts on existing and proposed residential amenity. The planning service notes that the house is proposed for the applicant who is registered disabled, but that it is not apparent from the submitted drawings that the property will be accessible for such. The noise impact assessment notes that in order to comply with the required indoor noise levels due to the M90 to the west, that the windows in the house would need to be closed and ventilation provided by passive trickle vents and mechanical whole house ventilation. In terms of the applicant's case, it is noted that alterations have been made to the proposal since the previous refusal, and these include a revised design to reflect the hip roof style of the cottages to the east, the reduced length and width of the property by 1.5 metres, more proposed tree planting. The parking area has moved further away from the existing house. Figures show no overlooking or privacy issues and no detrimental impact of overshadowing. The second reason for refusal related to the loss of trees on the last application was removed by the LRB. The trees which are removed will be replanted and will be augmented with additional planting, which will also enhance the habitat and green network. There is a history of approvals, and the proposal is now redesigned to relate more to the existing cottages to the east and respect the building pattern of Gairney Bank. No private amenity space would be overlooked. The southwest corner of Braeside House has previously been identified as the most suitable location for development, that the house will bookend the settlement at its western end. The materials are high quality and respect the area overall. The house will use existing infrastructure and public transport provision. No permission is required to remove the trees, and they will probably need to be taken down and replaced in any case. And it's only 1 year since permission in principle for a house expired. The project has been impacted by the uncertainty with the applicant's health, and they are nearing retirement age and are trying to downsize to support the family. The proposal is very similar to the Webster Homes development along the road, as these houses are large with large detached garages. There are no neighbour objections, and the pre-application advice did not discourage making an application. So just a couple of other matters. There's no objections from statutory consultees or third parties. Environmental Health were satisfied that the noise assessment shows noise from the road can be mitigated subject to the replacement shelter planting, and SEPA are satisfied that the phosphorus mitigation proposed is acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to questions. Bailey Williamson.
Yes, I do have a question. I was wondering if it's possible to go back to a site plan with the location of the development, please. Thank you. It's quite hard to see, but I was just wondering, Ms. Jenny, you said that there was going to be additional planting, and I'm just trying to figure out, is there sufficient space for additional planting of trees within the west side of that development? It doesn't look like there is. It looks like it's just a couple of feet, 2 or 3 feet by the looks of it. Is that correct?
I think you probably are correct, Councillor. There's not really much space between the west side of the new house and the boundary of the property. Obviously, the trees that exist are there at the moment. Once they come down, there would be more space available, but there's only 1 or 2 metres at the most, I would say.
Councillor Ingworth.
I have no questions.
Members, I have no questions either. So can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is the information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Bailey Williamson.
Happy to proceed.
Councillor Ingworth.
Happy to proceed.
I'm happy to proceed. So Bailey Williamson, if you could lead us on this one.
Yes, thank you, convener. My my view is that we should object to the application or refuse the application based on the notes or the view the office has provided. I would also mention that the reasons for refusal should include policy 1A as well, but yes, happy to refuse on that basis.
Councillor Illingworth.
I'd like to approve this application. I think the visual impact will be limited, and I think there's always a need for all more housing everywhere. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. So I have the deciding vote on this one. This has come before us before, not too long ago, and my decision then was to refuse based on the siting of the property and its detrimental effect to the main building and to some extent the other properties along the road. I note that the size of the building has changed, but the problem still remains the siting of it, and therefore I too am going to refuse the appeal based on the officer's reason for refusal. Again, the question comes up about reason for refusal number 2. We deleted this last time. It'll be down to between us, Bailey Williamson and myself, whether we take that one out. But I would be happy to see that one deleted, so it would be just on reason for refusal number 1. So at this stage, Mr. Elliott, we have a majority decision again, 2-1.
Yes, thank you, convener. Yes, while there's 2 looking to refuse and 1 looking to approve, it would be best that you tie up the ground of refusal, because obviously the decision notice has to be issued. I would say, convener, you're not bound by your previous decision, so you can also say, look, you know, given what we've heard today, I would actually agree ground to stay in, given what is said to be the tightness of the boundary. But it's a matter for yourselves as who's the strongest minded, and what do you think is the most important? Clearly you agree on ground of refusal number 1.
Bailey Williamson, let me have your thoughts on this one first.
Yes, I am concerned about the removal of the green buffer or the Leyland trees, as they're called, around the edge, and I would be concerned about their removal, particularly as a windbreak. So I would prefer to see that reason for refusal to remain.
Okay, Mr. Elliott, honestly, I'm easy either way. The main one is number 1, so I'm happy to leave number 2 in there.
Okay,
that's fine. Yeah, okay.
So that's refusal by 2-1, agreeing with the Appointed Officer's original grounds of refusal, with Councillor Illingworth dissenting, and I've written down limited acceptable impact. Okay.
We've had a request for a comfort break, so we'll have 5 minutes. Okay, members, we're back on again after a short recess. So that puts us on there, item 4.5 today, which is the installation of solar panels at the cottage, Leslie Road, Scotland Well in Kinross. Mrs. Tierney, back to you again.
Sorry, apologies. Yeah, this is aerial image of Scotland Well, with Leslie Road running in a west-east direction, and I don't know the name of the other road, apologies, running in a north-south direction on the west side of the image there. Application site denoted with the yellow star in the middle. Next slide, please. And then this is a closer in image of the appeal property marked with the yellow star there, just on the north side of Leslie Road. A number of other houses surrounding to west and east, and on the south side of Leslie Road as well, just opposite Bankfoot Park. Next slide, please. Then this is the outline of the application site in red, so you can see Leslie Road running through the middle of the site there, residential properties all around north and south side of Leslie Road. Next slide, please. Then this is the front elevation of the appeal property. Two sides of two cottages originally joined together now to form one dwelling house. The left-hand side there with two dormers for the upper floor accommodation, and with Velux roof lights on the other side of the house. Next slide, please. And then this is as you look west along Leslie Road. So the property to the immediate west side there with the red pan tile roof, and the other residential properties are further along the road and on the south side of the road behind that hedge, basically. Next slide, please. And then this is as you move east along Leslie Road away from the appeal property, number of semi-detached cottages on the left-hand side there. Next slide, please. And then this is as you look directly across the road from the appeal site to Bankfoot Road. Next slide, please. This is the rear of the appeal property, just accessed up at the communal area up the side of the property there on the west side of the property. Next slide, please. And then this is as you look from the dwelling house north up the garden area towards the hill in the background. Next slide, please. This is the settlement plan from the local development plan, and it also shows the outline of the conservation area in Scotland Well. So the appeal property is highlighted with the yellow arrow. So obviously well within the settlement boundary, which is the black line, but also the conservation area is denoted there with the light blue line. So it obviously doesn't include all of Scotland Well, and it also includes a significant area of ground to the north side of the settlement there, which my understanding is to do with the history and rig farming system and the landscape in that area. Next slide, please. And then this is just closer in, the location of the appeal site with the yellow arrow, and then the blue dotted line being the outline of the conservation area just along Leslie Road there, the more modern houses on the south side of Leslie Road out with the conservation area, and those on the north side within it. Next slide, please. On the left-hand side here, we've got the property as exists, front elevation and roof plan, and then on the right-hand side you have the proposed solar panels on both sides of the property, in between the dormers on the left-hand side of the house, and in between the Velux roof lights on the right-hand side of the house, both on the elevation there and on the roof plan. Next slide, please. This information was submitted by the appellant, so it obviously shows the conservation area boundary. It shows their own property, which is the cottage with a line running from it, where you see the words "the cottage" in the middle. But the two properties they've drawn attention to at Applerig and number 6, the Crescent, are the two black highlighted properties that are within the conservation area, and they've highlighted those because those two properties have solar panels on the roofs of those houses. Next slide, please. And this is an image of number 6, the Crescent, which is the semi-detached cottage with 2 solar panels on the front of the property there. Next slide, please. And then on the west side, as you head west along Leslie Road, modern 2-storey house there, set back from the road with solar panels on the roof. Next slide, please. And then this was an image that the appellant included with their papers, which obviously shows the difference to the original properties as built. And as you can see from the photographs of the property now, they've gone through quite a lot of alterations over the years. Next slide, please. So the appeal concerns, as you've seen, is traditional 1.5-storey dwelling house situated in Scotland Well on Leslie Road, opposite the junction with Bankfoot Park. The site is also within Scotland Well Conservation Area. The applicant wishes to install 10 standard style solar panels on the principal south elevation of the dwelling house. 4 of these will be on the western side of the roof between the 2 dormers, and the other 6 will be installed in 3 pairs on the eastern side of the roof. The reasons for refusal: firstly, the proposed solar panels, by virtue of their modern design, scale, maximum height and prominent siting, would have a detrimental impact on the character and appearance of the Scotland Well Conservation Area. Approval would therefore be contrary to Section 64(1) of the Planning, Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Scotland Act 1997, which requires the Council to have special regard to the desirability of preserving or enhancing the character or appearance of the designated conservation area. And secondly, the proposed solar panels, by virtue of their modern design, scale, maximum height and prominent siting, would be detrimental to the traditional character and appearance of the dwelling house and detrimental to the character and appearance of the Scotland Well Conservation Area. Approval would therefore be contrary to policies 7D, 11 and 16G1 of National Planning Framework 4, contrary to policies 1A, 1B, brackets C, 28A and 33A, brackets A of Perth and Kinross Local Development Plan 2, and contrary to Historic Environment Scotland guidance managing change in the historic environment, micro renewables, and managing change in the historic environment, roofs. So in terms of the assessment by the Planning Service, it is recognised that the applicant wishes to improve the energy efficiency of their dwelling house and the positive contribution this makes towards the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and associated climate change impacts. However, renewables policies require such developments to any detrimental impact on visual amenity and the historic environment. The south sits to the immediate north side of Leslie Road as it passes through Scotland Well to the east. It is a traditional dwelling house built of stone and slate, which, while located in the conservation area, is not a listed building. The conclusion is that the proposal fails to comply with policies governing the impact of developments on the historic environment, including those of Historic Environment Scotland, and that the impact will be significant and detrimental to the character and appearance of the roof and the house. So the applicant's case, they've stated that the conservation of energy was not submitted with the original application. However, as we are all aware, energy savings are a priority at local and national levels. For this reason, they installed air source heating in 2020 and had hoped to complement this with solar panels and a battery. And their application for a Home Energy Scotland grant and loan has been granted already. The installation of solar panels on other properties, only a few properties away, still within the conservation area, indicating that installing solar panels on the property would not impact on preserving or enhancing the character and appearance of the designated conservation area. And as I've shown on the overheads there, a plan of the conservation area and photographs of nearby properties have been provided. There are also 2 others still within the conservation area and on Leslie Road under construction, one of which is being advertised as having the option of solar panels. When they bought the property in 1993, it had 2 dormer windows on the main side, but otherwise was very similar to the old photograph with slates on the roof. The other side of the property was in severe disrepair and had to be removed. In accordance with the planning permission granted in 1993, grey concrete tiles were used and 3 Velux windows were installed. Using all black solar panels would not be detrimental to the appearance of the house, while also allowing them to reduce their energy consumption and fuel bills. And to our knowledge, there have been no objections to the plans. So just in terms of other information, no other objections from third parties or other statutory consultees. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Journey. Can I ask questions? Bailey Williamson, any questions?
The report mentions that the officers felt that it would be more suitable to put the solar panels into a garden, either the garden or the side of the garden. Is that correct?
I think that's a view of the Planning Service as part of their deliberations on the application. they appear to suggest that there would be alternatives available to the applicant to locate the solar panels elsewhere within the property. I don't know exactly where that would be. I think you see in the photographs, there's not really any buildings as such that perhaps would take that number of solar panels. You're maybe looking at some ground mounted or other solutions.
I'm probably a bit unfair to ask you this question, so please tell me if you don't know the answer, but the applicant said that they'd applied for the grant for the installation of these solar panels. And I'm just wondering out loud whether that grant would still possibly cover if an alternative location was found for them at ground level.
I probably can't answer that, but I think on the basis they've already got a loan and they don't have any permission, it's probably been granted just for the property.
Councillor Illingworth, any questions?
Is the loan a material consideration?
I would suggest not, councillor.
Just a couple of things. These solar panels, I think, come in slightly different colours, black, lighter grey. If we want to do, can we condition the colour of these things? I'm really in the area which I'm not an expertise on. Some are very dark colour and some are a lighter colour.
I think on the basis we don't know, they come in other colours, and that's not what they've applied for. I would steer you away from doing. Mr. Elliott's got a different view, but
I think you would agree because obviously using your general knowledge, you know that generally they're a dark colour and the roof is not. So we don't know whether there's something which is available to kind of replicate what's already there. So you'd be would take a cautious approach and you wouldn't condition the colouring.
Yeah, but maybe Winston, you'll have another question. But just going to ask, can we go back to the photograph of the actual property itself again? Is that possible? Just so we can just see the roof of it. Fine, thanks. Billy Williamson, did you have a question?
Yeah, it was just to clarify something you said, convener, about the colour. Did Mr. Taney say that the applicant was proposing to install black solar panels? Is that correct? Yeah, thank you.
Just one other point. Again, you may not be able to answer this because it's a technical thing. Obviously, there was air source heat pump in the back we saw in the photograph. My understanding is that to make these work efficiently, you do need solar panels as well. I mean, it may be pushing your expertise to the limit now, but I'm not sure.
I couldn't answer that, convener, I'm afraid. Sorry.
Okay. So unless there's any other questions, members will proceed. Can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, in the information contained in the papers, the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Illingworth?
Happy to proceed.
And Bailey Williamson?
Happy to proceed.
And I too am happy to proceed on this one. So I'll start us off on this one. These situations are always very difficult to determine, I think, because we have a conservation area, which is fair enough, and we have obviously a desire to use solar panels, which will obviously, as we know, mitigate climate change and greenhouse gases, but also in this day and age, obviously reduce some bills. So it's always a difficult balance to have here. And I also note that the comments they've made, there are other properties nearby which have solar panels on, one of which is just test 2, and the other one has a few more, but it's a more modern building. This is obviously an older style cottage in a prominent position on the side of the road. And the number of panels which they're looking to install is quite a high number. On balance, I feel the number is slightly too high. Need to be careful how I say this, I think, but the concept of what they want to do, I think, is there. I just feel in this instance they haven't got the balance of numbers right, and the number of panels they want to put on the property will be so high that it will have a detrimental effect on the area. Bear in mind it is an old cottage in that roadside position. So I think their idea is there. I think they need to go back and think about the numbers of panels they want to put on. So in this instance, I'm going to refuse the application. But as I say, I think there's the concept they're looking for is there. Bailey Williamson.
Yes, thank you. I'm inclined to agree with you about the number of panels that are being installed on the roof, and my view is to agree with the officer's recommendations in the paper for refusal. But I would also add that the applicant may want to consider putting the panels into another location within the garden as well.
Councillor Ingham.
I agree with my colleagues. This is the conservation area, and so I would refuse permission.
Thank you, Mr. Elliott. So we have a unanimous decision on this one to follow, I think, on the reasons for refusal that we have.
Yes, convener. What I have is all 3 members refusing in line with the appointed officer's refusal, which is page 597 with no changes.
Thank you, members. So we'll now move on to the second section of today, which is section 5, which is now 3 items which have been deferred for officers' consideration, all short-term lets and coming back. So what I'll do is, if I can ask Mrs. Tierney to introduce number 5.1. This is a change of use of a flat to form a short-term let accommodation unit at 4B Bonnet Hill Road, Pitlochry.
Convener, just to recollect, sorry to step in. These are deferrals, and I should explain that part of the deferral was for you to also have a copy of the up-to-date non-statutory guidance. And just to make clear, you've been given a copy of that. It's not apparent in the papers, but you have been given a copy of that.
We all have a copy.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So, Mrs. Tierney, if you could give us a rough introduction.
Yes, thank you, convener. We'll just run through these quickly. So application site just on the corner of Athol Road there and Bonnet Hill Road, just outlined in red. Next slide, please. And then just on a actual plan here, the property outlined in red on the corner of Bonnet Hill Road and Athol Road. Next slide, please. And then this is the plan of this property. So ground floor plan, first floor plan and second floor plan. The property is on the second floor. So the ground and first floor areas marked in red are just the stairwell up to the property on the second floor. And then it comes into effectively a 1-bedroom studio flat there on the second floor. Next slide, please. And then just some images of the property. As I said, just right on the corner of Bonnet Hill Road and Athol Road. Fairly traditional property within the town centre with other uses on the ground floor and in the area. Next slide, please. And then this is the other side of the property with the door into the property just in the middle there with the blue. Next slide, please. And then this is the bin area around the back of the property. Next slide, please. And then that's just a view of the property from the other side with the bins there at the rear. Next slide, please. Not so many on that one. So yes, the appeal was deferred in January to allow for comments to be made in terms of the adopted short-term let guidance. The application site is an upper floor 1-bed studio flat contained to the rear of the building, which is a 2.5-storey corner building at the junctions of Bonnet Hill and Athol Roads in Pitlochry Town Centre. A prominent period building in the conservation area, but not listed. The access to the upper floors is via a shared staircase, which leads onto the private lane out with the application site. A similar application and appeal for a neighbouring 1-bedroom flat at 4A Bonnet Road is also on the agenda in a couple of items. So as we know, the Council's non-statutory planning guidance on short-term lets was approved on the 1st of November and is a material consideration, and the application was determined prior to the adoption of the guidance, and all parties have therefore had the opportunity to provide comments on the appeal in light of this. The consideration of the application by the Planning Service originally was concerned that the proposal would result in the loss of the flat to short-term let accommodation in the PH16 postcode area, which is already subject to a proliferation of holiday accommodation. This in turn would adversely impact the availability of residential accommodation locally. Undoubtedly, economic benefits associated with the proposal, not least to the applicants themselves and to local businesses who benefit from the custom of guests, but this does not necessarily outweigh the loss of accommodation in this instance. The expected high turnover guests has the potential to increase disturbance to neighbours, and the proposal would contribute to a cumulative adverse impact on the mixed-use character of the town centre by further eroding the residential component of that mix of uses, which is crucial for the vitality and viability of the town centre. However, obviously, since the appeal was deferred at the LRB meeting in January, the Planning Service has commented on the proposal in light of the adopted STL guidance as follows. As relevant to the assessment of criteria 1 of MPF 4 Policy 30E, the STL guidance has indicated that town centres may well be suited to the introduction of short-term let accommodation in terms of residential amenity and the area's character. In this instance, the flat is within Pitlochry Town Centre, and whilst the flat is accessed via a communal entrance, this itself did not form a ground for refusal. As such, had the proposal been considered by the Council as Planning Authority after November the 1st, 2023, the impact of this proposed STL unit on local amenity and the character of the immediate vicinity is likely to have been considered acceptable. In respect of criterion 2 of MPF 4 Policy 30E, the proposal would result in the loss of a flat to short-term let accommodation in an urban location. It is also acknowledged that the Council's housing strategy have undertaken consultation in respect of the introduction of a short-term let control area. However, no such control area has yet been formally designated. Whilst the assessment of this policy criterion for the application as originally submitted referred to a postcode district level of saturation of potential short-term lets, it has since been considered that a more up-to-date analysis of the proliferation of short-term lets in the area, including but not limited to recent licensing data, requires to be undertaken before the Council as Planning Authority decide whether to progress with the designation of a short-term let control area. In this instance, given the town centre location of the proposal, it is considered that the loss of this one-bedroom flat in the town centre to short-term let accommodation would not have a significant impact on the availability of residential accommodation in the local area. And whilst the economic benefits associated with the proposal are likely to be modest, this no longer constitutes grounds for concern in this instance. As such, had the proposal been considered by the Council as Planning Authority after November the 1st, 2023, the proposed loss of a residential flat to short-term let accommodation is likely to have been considered acceptable. In summary, had this proposal been considered against the STL guidance adopted in November 2023, it is likely that it would have satisfied the relevant criteria within Policy 30E Tourism of National Planning Framework 4 and Policy 1A Placemaking of the Perth and Kinross LDP 2. Therefore, the proposal would likely have been recommended for approval subject to the following conditions, and that is that the development hereby approved shall be solely used as short-term let accommodation and shall not be occupied as the sole or main residence of any occupant, and the reason being in order to clarify the terms of this planning permission. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tierney. Members, I will open up to questions for you, but obviously we have to bear in mind the decision of the officer. If you want to have any questions, Bailey Williamson.
Yes, the one question, I'm not sure whether it's for Colin or Ms. Tierney, is about an explanation of between a mixed residential zone and a residential zone. If you could give us an explanation of that, please.
So I think with particular reference to Pitlochry, what you're looking at is an actual designated town centre area. And then out with that town centre area, you then start moving towards fundamentally a residential area. And in Pitlochry, the actual residential area is very close to the town centre, but there's clearly a line between those two particular areas.
Councillor Illingworth, any questions?
No questions.
Okay, so we'll just go to the formality of it. Can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is the information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor. or do we require more information? Bailey Williamson,
Yes, happy to proceed.
Councillor Lingworth.
Happy to proceed.
I'm happy to proceed. This is actually mentioned the case that was deferred back for a comment by the planning officer, and then further comments by the applicant. As we've read, the planning officer has now decided, based upon the introduction of non-statutory guidance on the 1st of November, that the decision would have been different, and he would have approved the paperwork and approved the application. And given that situation, I'm happy to agree with him completely. So, my colleagues, Councillor Lingworth
I'm happy to agree.
and Bailey Williams.
Sorry, I'm happy to agree.
Okay, fine. Mr. Elliott, that's obviously a unanimous approval based upon the comments of the planning officer.
Yes, Convener, obviously, I think what you're saying is approve in line with policy, with agreeing with the development plan, accords with the development plan, and it'll be granted subject to suitable terms and conditions, which you've kind of got an idea of what they are already. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Can I just ask a question? I think on previous occasions where STLs have been approved, apart from the recommended condition of the planning service, the LRB was considering the grant of a temporary 3-year permission. Is that something that you'd wish to?
Sorry, I wouldn't personally in this occasion, but I'll ask my colleagues, see what they feel. Bailey Williams.
Yeah, I would be, if it's competent to introduce a 3-year temporary license on the understanding that we are we were in consultation about creating a development zone or a control zone, so to say. And we don't know what the outcome of that may or may not be. I understand that we're just about at the end of the licensing scheme, the licensing scheme, so we will have a better idea of where we stand within the next 6 months or so, I would assume. So a temporary application would cover that for 3 years, and then we can review that application at that point.
Councillor Williams, what's your thoughts on that?
I'd like to go for permanent, given it's a mixed use property.
I have to say on this occasion, Bailey Williamson, I would agree with Councillor Lingworth. I think I would prefer to leave it as it is. It's a mixed use. It's not going to change. And as we know, the applicant, as we'll see in 5.3, owns both properties. So I would be inclined to give a permanent decision on this one. So, Mr. Elliott, we are as we are. Thank you. So, members, we'll now move on to 5.2, which is a change of use of a flat to a short-term let, again in Pitlochry. This is at 2 Jubilee Place, Pitlochry. Mrs. Tierney, could you just reintroduce this one for us?
Thank you, convener. Again, we'll just run through the slides first. So this is the location of the appeal property on Lower Oakfield. Toberargan Road is possibly more known to you in terms of specific location, which itself runs west and down to the town centre. Next slide, please. And then this is the red line application site drawing, which goes around the appeal property and the parking space in front of the property as well. Next slide, please. And this is the floor layout of the property, which in this case is it's an upper floor flat, but it's accessed from its own front door. And you go in the front door and you go straight upstairs to the property. Next slide, please. So this is the property itself, which, as I've said, where the yellow arrow is the lobby area, the front door that takes you into the property on the first floor. Next slide, please. And then this is as you come further into the development, just looking back so you can see what's round about in terms of the other houses in this particular development. Next slide, please. And again, this just shows you the other side of the development in relation to the appeal property. Next slide, please. So yes, this application appeal was deferred in January to allow for comments to be made in terms of the adopted short-term let guidance. The property is a first floor 2-bedroom flat located within a residential area of Pitlochry. in the development built on the former curling rink, where there are 22 flats which are a mix of affordable and private ownership. It has its own direct access to the street and a parking space. The application form states that the property has been used as an STL since 2015. The Council's non-statutory planning guidance on short-term lets was approved on the 1st of November 2023 and is a material consideration, and the application was determined prior to the adoption of this, and since then all parties have had the opportunity to provide comments on the appeal in light of this. So the reasons for refusal in this case: the proposed retrospective change of use is contrary to Policy 30 Tourism E of MPF 4, and the proposal will result in 1, an unacceptable impact on local amenity and character of the area, and 2, the loss of residential accommodation where such loss is not outweighed by demonstrable local economic benefits. And secondly, the proposal is contrary to MPF 4 Policy 14C, Design, Quality and Place, and Perth and Kinross LDP 2, Policies 1A and 1B, Placemaking, and Policy 17D, Residential Areas, as the short-term let accommodation would adversely impact on the amenity of residents of the flats, and the short-term let use is not compatible with the amenity and character of the existing quiet enclosed residential development. So the assessment by the planning service: the flat is part of a wider flatted development of 22 flats in a courtyard arrangement, which provides for a quiet, private enclosed development with a central parking area. Through the use of the flat as a short-term let, there is the potential for noise from the users of the properties to affect neighbouring residential properties. The use of the property as an STL is considered to be incompatible with the character of the residential flatted development, and the intensification of use and movements would adversely impact the amenity of neighbouring residents. The proposal would result in the loss of a flat to short-term let accommodation in the PH16 postcode area, which is already subject to a proliferation of holiday accommodation. This in turn would adversely impact the availability of residential accommodation locally. There are undoubtedly economic benefits associated with the proposal, not least to the applicants themselves and to local businesses who benefit from the custom of guests, but these do not necessarily outweigh the loss of residential accommodation in this instance. Since the deferral, the Planning Service has commented further on the appeal in light of the STL guidance and has noted that in this instance, the application site is within an area zoned for residential and compatible uses. The application site also lies within a flatted development served by a communal courtyard car park with wider areas of shared community amenity space. The wider development is part of social housing, with the remaining flats originally offered for first sale at an affordable rate. This requirement did not remain for subsequent sales. The effect of the proposal on local amenity and character of this area should therefore be considered, in addition to the loss of residential accommodation and local economic benefits which may accrue from the proposal. In this case, the benefits of providing holiday accommodation are not seen to outweigh the impacts on the residential character of the area and the loss of affordable housing. The consideration of this proposal did acknowledge and address the STL guidance. If this proposal had been considered after the guidance was adopted in November 2023, the recommendation would not have changed and the proposal would have been recommended for refusal for the same reasons. In this case, the appellant has further commented that questions are asked about the lack of evidence or reasoning in the officer's report about how they came to the conclusion that there will be an unacceptable impact on local amenity and character of the area. The property has effectively been let as a short-term let for 8 years without complaint from nearby residents, and it has never been used as residential accommodation since it was built. It is noted that Jubilee Place is a public road and not a private, quiet, enclosed residential development. They argue that there is little difference in amenity between long-term and short-term let accommodation. The flat on the ground floor is also a short-term let. There are no objections from the 36 neighbours. It can be argued that a family with small children will be a noisier neighbour. There is a parking space and there's extra parking available. And further to the comments from the Planning Service, since the deferral, the appellant has further commented that observations of policies adopted by other areas of Scotland appear to make the requirement for planning consent only necessary for properties within newly formed control areas. and the reasons given for refusal are nullified by the fact that the property has been used as an STL for the past 8 years, and therefore the impact on the local amenity of the area is tried and tested, and there is no loss of residential accommodation. And just finally, the other matters, there are no objections. Environmental Health has not objected. And Communities Housing Strategy advised that the postcode district level of saturation of potential short-term lets is above the level at which it may be considered appropriate to introduce a control area in order to help manage high concentrations of STLs where it affects the availability of residential housing or the character of a neighbourhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions, Councillor North?
Two questions. What is the evidence for loss of amenity and noise for short-term lets compared to normal letting?
Councillor, I think it's to do with the intensity of use. If I'm honest, a long-term let is effectively the same as anybody living in the property on a permanent basis. Short-term lets, obviously, there's a higher turnover of guests and comings and goings from the property due to the short-term nature of the letting periods.
So is there any actual hard evidence to support that?
I think, councillor, there have been plenty of other appeals up to DPA level where there has been antisocial behaviour, there have been impacts on amenities. So it's certainly from an appeal that we also had in this area at the DPA level, it's considered that short-term lets are a commercial use and an intensification of use, and possibly can affect amenity in the way that Mrs. Tierney described. In terms of hard evidence, of course, what you're talking about is this individual one? Well, that's for you to make your mind up. It doesn't mean to say there have to be objections and hard evidence. It's you to make your mind up based upon the individual circumstances. So I'm not directly answering your question in the way perhaps you're expecting, but that's deliberate. It's because of the way things are assessed and the way they've been assessed. It's a commercial use, it's an intensification of use. And the thing I would add to that is it's recognised that the timing of people coming for short-term lets to the properties is generally different and can affect amenity in that way. But it's not just simply the timing of people coming in and out. There's also the use of the park coming in and out, the parking spaces, that sort of thing. So it's commercial use, intensification of use.
The second question is that you mentioned residential availability. Is there any evidence that refusing short-term let actually leads to a greater provision of rental accommodation?
Sorry, could you just repeat that, councillor, please?
Does granting of permissions for short-term let increase the level of rental accommodation? Is there any evidence to support that?
Sorry, not as far as I'm aware, councillor.
If I could come in again, what you're doing is you're looking at the Scottish Government bringing in all the short-term let provisions, both civic and planning, is recognising that they could come back into use. Now, what they're saying is you're looking at the general strategic level. Of course, it's early days to know whether individual ones do come back in, but you're actually, again, not looking at the individual evidence, you're looking at the general structural position.
Thank you. Mrs. Chair, you mentioned this was originally affordable housing. I just wonder, could we clarify, because it seems what you were saying, it was affordable in the sense it was a low-cost purchase option. Is that right? Rather than social housing that's rented. Am I right there?
Yeah, convener, my understanding is that this was built as a affordable housing scheme in the proper sense of the word. Available to, private, social or whatever council properties. And normally the conditions on those properties is that they are still, if they're transferred on, that it's still somebody who is in need of affordable accommodation that is able to purchase those properties. It may well be that if it's then sold on again, that condition no longer applies, and it may be just available on the open market.
Bailey Williamson.
Yeah, it's just comments sort of / observation. My understanding is that virtually all the properties around that Jubilee Court are available for low cost rent, including the church or former church, which is just across the road as well. There are a number of properties there that do short term lets. So, but that's not for consideration today. Would it be possible to go back to the plan of the property? I think you said there was the properties upstairs, and my concern is that you have to go through an entrance hall. People are going to be disturbed who live below that property through possibly suitcases being dragged upstairs, etc., etc. Plus, let's face it, we all make additional noise and let our hair down a bit more when we're on holiday than we do when we're in our own homes, without realising the impact it has on neighbours. So I think we need to take that into some form of consideration. Yes, I'm sorry, I'd lost my train of thought completely. Yes, but I was just wondering about the hallway, and it is upstairs, isn't it? And it does go over the top of the property below.
I would assume so, Councillor. It's obviously got its own front door, which is that porch area that comes out the front of the property, and you go in that door and you go straight up the stairs. So it is completely separate to the property below, but obviously it does run above it. Yes.
And you made mention earlier of the fact that the property had been run for 8 years without any complaint, but that is not a consideration for today either, is it? Because they've come forward for planning permission.
No, they're required to apply for planning permission anyway. It's not been in operation as an STL for at least 10 years, where they could have perhaps applied for a certificate of lawfulness to demonstrate that its lawful use as an STL was indeed the case. They're required to apply for permission regardless of the 8 years that they have said they have been operating it as an STL.
I think my understanding actually it's not the current person who's bought it, looking to buy it or bought it recently. It's actually previous people that run it, just as a factual bit of information.
Thank you, member. So we'll now move to consideration. Can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Illingworth.
Happy to proceed.
Bailey Williamson.
Happy to proceed.
And I too am happy to proceed. So on this occasion, Councillor Illingworth, could you start us off?
Yeah, my view is that we should approve this application. I think it will have a limited impact in terms of social noise. Bumping up and down stairs only happens once a move. It's got a separate entry, and it's still very close to the city centre. And also there are a number of bed and breakfast establishments on the same street. Lower Oakfield. So yeah, that's my opinion.
Thank you, Councillor Illingworth. I'll start next if I may. Before going further, I noticed the applicant, when he commented on the planning officer's views after the deferral, seemed to have got an incorrect piece of information here. He was talking about the fact that the draft or non-statutory proposal, which was originally applied, was incorrectly applied. I think that's incorrect. It was a material consideration at the time, and the reason why we deferred this case was because that policy had been adopted on the 1st of November, and it was sent back to planning officers and subsequently to the applicant to see if there had been any change in their decision based upon the adoption of that document. So it wasn't incorrect at the time when it was applied, and that's a mistake on his part. As we've heard, this is a residential area, once again, was originally designed as affordable housing for purchase. It is a residential zone. residential amenity is the core of all these points when it comes to flats, and the planning officer, having had the deferral regarding the adoption of the non-statutory guidance, has come back saying his decision remains unchanged. And the point he makes in there is that intensification of use does affect the amenity of properties, and I feel that has to be taken into account, as does the appeal, as Mr. Elliott's mentioned in the past, which also talks about intensification of use, which affects the amenity of an area, such as parking, luggage, guests, movement, and it also mentions that the lack of any complaint doesn't mean that the amenity is not affected. So on this basis, on this occasion, I am going to refuse the appeal. I think the planning officer is correct in his reasons for refusal, and I'm happy with those to stand. So I'm rejecting the appeal. Bailey Williams.
Thank you, convener. Like yourself, I'm going to reject this appeal, subject to the reasons outlined by the officers, with the exception of policies 1B, which were put in the note of refusal, and along with existing private, the character of the, sorry, should I say, the sentence reads, if I can find the start of the sentence, in fact, it's not compatible with the amenity and character of the existing private. If that existing private could be deleted, but I don't believe that this is, I believe this is a residential zone and should remain as a residential zone. So therefore, I'm turning down this application.
Thank you. So, Mr. Elliott, we have a 2-1 majority yet again. With a couple of slight changes to the reasons for refusal. Number 2, actually.
Yes, thank you, convener. Yes, 2-1 majority to refuse. Dealing with the dissenting minority to approve, what I've got written down is limited impact and it's close to the town centre. And in terms of the refusal, I'll take you to page 689. My understanding, members, is that certainly Bailey Williamson proposed a couple of changes. If I've understood it correctly, in the reference to policies 1A and 1B, simply you take out the A and 1B, because it's not really part of the subdivisions of 1B that I'm aware of. So it's just policies 1A. And you're also looking to take out a reference to existing private. So it's emphasising it's the character of the quiet enclosed residential development.
Yeah, agreed.
Yes,
Yeah,
okay.
agreed. Yeah. Yep, thank you very much. So we come now to the last item on the agenda. This relates to 4A Bonnet Hill Road, again a short-term let in retrospect. We've just heard 4B. Members, in the interest of saving Mrs. Journey's voice and seeing the same photographs again, we'll be happy to proceed on the basis of the comment of the planning officer, which is that in light of the deferral back for review of the non-statutory guidance, he has actually changed his decision on this. Are we happy to approve that? I'm assuming, Mr. Elliott, procedure-wise, we can do that.
Well, I think I'll partly defer to Mrs. Tierney, but of course, almost all of the information is the same between the two applications. So unless Mrs. Tierney has anything further to add, and unless members have questions, then we can proceed. And you're willing to go ahead, members, you can proceed to your decision.
I don't have anything else to add, Chair. Obviously, the planning services made further comments. The appellant has not made any further comments in light of that either.
Fine. Okay, members, so unless you have any questions, are you happy to go over the just a comment? Okay, I'll pass over to Bailey Williamson for a second.
My comment would be is yes, I'm happy to approve the application, but subject to a 3-year temporary application, which I'm sure I'm going to lose, but I needed to mention that.
I'll go to Councillor Illingworth first for his thoughts on that.
I'm happy to proceed with the officer's views for a permanent approval.
I'm sorry to say, Bailey Williamson, on this occasion I have to agree, purely because of the location of it, I think, in this case, and the comments that have been made. So we'll go for a permanent approval, Mr. Elliott, but apart from that, we're all agreed.
Yes, members, that would be grant on a 2-1 majority to grant subject to suitable terms, conditions and formatives.
That now brings us to the end of this local review body. It only remains for me to thank everybody. Thank Councillor Lingworth and Bailey Williamson for being with us. Councillor Massey, of course, for stepping in earlier on when I had to step out. Mrs. Journey, Mr. Elliott, and also finally a welcome back to Mr. Williams, who's finally come back to the most important committee of them all. Thank you very much. And we'll see you on the next one. Thank you. Bye-bye.